Madam President, in a moment we'll hold a cloture vote on the Strengthening America's Security in the Middle East Act, and soon have an opportunity to pass this legislation, which has been balled up for some time because of the intervening shutdown. But it reaffirms, importantly, our longstanding commitment to stability in the Middle East. This vote has been a long time coming. The 4 bills that comprise this legislation enjoyed bipartisan support last year, but we ran out of time before we could get them passed. Exactly 1 month ago today, as we were kicking off this new Congress, the Majority Leader announced his intent to package these 4 non-controversial bills together and bring them to the floor. Here we are a month later, and this is how non-controversial things get handled in these strange times we live in. For weeks, our Democratic colleagues have blocked us from voting on this legislation, not because they disagreed with the contents, but because they claim no work should be done during a governmental shutdown, even though 75% of the government was up and running and funded, including the legislative branch of which Congress is a part. But they use this as an excuse to showboat and to not do their job. And of course, something changed when they saw an opportunity to take a vote on an entirely political matter involving Russia. All of a sudden, they decided, oh, it's okay to do other things during the shutdown as long as it has the potential of embarrassing our political adversaries, including President Trump. Nevertheless, I'm glad that today we'll finally be able to vote on this bill. In the face of the ongoing troubles in the Middle East, it's important to reaffirm our commitment to our allies and condemn the brutalities of our enemies. While this legislation is far from a solution, comprehensive solution to the challenges faced in the Middle East, it's important to take steps in the right direction where we can. First, this bill strengthens our relationship with Israel, the lone democracy in the region. Israel faces near constant attacks from Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorist groups. To ensure that Israel is poised to not only withstand but to counter threats from these shared adversaries, this bill authorizes needed military assistance. That includes things like missile defense and loan guarantees. It also includes measures to enhance Israel's ability to address threats in its vicinity, like drones, which are increasingly used by Iran, which is bent on the destruction of the Israel state. This is a major step to ensure that the nation of Israel is poised to tackle both the threats of today and tomorrow. Secondly, this bill provides support to Jordan by reauthorizing legislation to deepen our defense cooperation. Jordan has borne the brunt of much of the upheaval in the Syrian civil war, with many, many refugees calling Jordan their home temporarily because they're displaced from their home country. Jordan continues to face grave challenges posed by that chaos in Syria, and our assistance is desperately needed. As I said, Jordan has absorbed a disproportionate number of refugees who've been escaping the Syrian civil war. Some 740,000 refugees are currently in the relatively small country, making it the second highest refugee host per capita in the world. The impact of the Syrian crisis is immense, and our assistance with the humanitarian relief is critical. Third, this legislation provides flexibility for state and local governments who disagree with the boycott, divest, and sanctions, or BDS movement. This movement is designed to isolate Israel, both economically and politically, by encouraging governments and businesses, including academic institutions, to cut ties with the Jewish state. At least 34 states, including mine, the state of Texas, have already enacted legislation to combat BDS. This legislation doesn't require states to take any sort of particular stance. It simply clarifies the right to counter boycotts of Israel without fear that they are somehow in jeopardy of federal law. Finally, this bill takes steps to address the ongoing crisis in Syria writ large. It holds accountable those responsible for the crisis in Syria by imposing new sanctions on anyone who supports Syria, either financially or militarily, specifically targeting military aviation and telecommunications and energy industries. It also provides needed aid to impacted communities and condemns the heinous human rights violations of the Assad regime. In addition to these 4 pillars of this legislation, I'm glad we have the opportunity to vote this afternoon on an amendment to affirm that American leadership is needed in our ongoing fight in Syria and Afghanistan. We simply cannot afford to leave a vacuum in places where terrorists flood when they take advantage of the chaos and the upheaval of the Syrian civil war. These are places where they can lodge and grow and train and then export their terrorist attacks, not only around the region, but even as we saw in 9/11 around the world. There's no doubt we've made great progress on our fight against ISIS and al-Qaeda, but as the Majority Leader noted when he offered this amendment last week, our response to this progress must not be to take our foot off the gas pedal, but rather keep with those strategies that have been working. One of our colleagues, the senator from Florida, Senator Rubio, said, really, terrorism is like a tumor. It's like a cancer. And you can try to eliminate it, but if you're unsuccessful in eliminating it, even though you've shrunk it, it will come back as soon as you remove the pressure. Though we've made incredible gains in the fight to eradicate these terrorist groups, the threat has not been entirely eliminated, and our job may never be finished. This is what some people have called the long war, and sadly, it's necessary in order to keep ourselves safe as well as our allies. Fully defeating these groups and their radical ideology will require our continued commitment. We simply can't unremember the lessons of 9/11, which are things that happen overseas don't stay overseas. And when you have power vacuums or safe havens for terrorist organizations to exploit, then that endangers not only people in the region, but also us here at home. We cannot allow a resurgence of ISIS or al-Qaeda and somehow let the gains that we have fought so hard to make slip through our fingers. During a time of ongoing instability in the Middle East, it's imperative that our allies remain confident in our commitment and our partnership and stand ready to continue to fight for our shared interests. As I indicated, this bill won't solve all the problems in the Middle East. It will not provide justice for innocent civilians killed by the Assad regime or rebuild the communities destroyed at the hands of terrorist groups. But it's an important step to ensure our allies are prepared to fight alongside us and defend our shared national security interests. This legislation will support and protect our allies, safeguard the United States' interests in the Middle East, and take a stand against the despicable human rights violations committed by the Assad regime. So I look forward to supporting the Majority Leader's amendment this afternoon and voting yes on this legislation when that opportunity arises. And finally, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the following interns at the Senate Energy Committee be granted privileges of the floor through March 15, 2019. Grant Cummins and Alexandra Ongman.
Without objection.
I yield the floor, and I'd note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.